The following is an AZPM original production.
And welcome to the press room on AZPM. I'm your host, Steve Goldstein. Our latest edition includes this illustrious array of panelists: Tim Steller of the Arizona Daily Star, Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel, Ziegler of AZPM, and Ellie Wolfe of the Arizona Daily Star. Thank you all for being here today. Tim, the biggest issue I think of the week to discuss is something we won't really know precise information based on when we're taping this program, but the visit of Vice President Kamala Harris finally to the border. I say finally because she's been criticized so much about this. Let's talk about why she's actually here.
Well, yeah, we haven't seen the visit yet, but we can predict what's going to happen. And it's not just because they put out press releases in advance and all that. We have seen this before. I mean, anyone who lives in this region knows that politicians come to the Arizona border time and again for basically publicity purposes. You know, they do their ads. They come from all over the country. They say they're going to be tough or solve the problem or something like that. And in her case, Harris has been criticized, especially early in the term, because she was supposed to be resolving the root causes of migration, and conservatives were demanding that she go to the border. She really, I think she has been once maybe, but she didn't respond.
Dylan, is it wholly symbolic, the fact that she's finally going? Because we're almost in October and she hasn't been there yet.
Well, so much of politics is about being, working with symbols and trying to message. Harris's folks did tell us prior to her trip here that she was going to be making some major policy announcements. We're not quite sure what the details of that are going to be. Certainly a lot of it will be bragging about the impact of the federal funding that has gone into the ports of entry, the border crossings, trying to beef up the tech there and increase the number of officers. And in fact, one of the things that Republicans tried to attack Harris with over the past week or so was the endorsement by a union. Their messaging was that it was the IRS union that was endorsing Vice President Harris. Uh-huh. Actually, that union is a large union, the National Treasury Employees Union, and it also represents some 25,000 Customs and Border Protection officers who work at the ports of entry.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Zach, is this a chance to in some ways take a bow for something the Biden administration has done?
Yeah, there has been one success that they can point to, and I don't think it's too much of a coincidence that they chose Douglas, where they're updating the old port. They're building a new one about 4.5 miles down the road. That was $400 million from the bipartisan infrastructure law that went towards that. So it is a chance to talk more about the custom side of things than the border patrol side of things on this issue.
And Ellie, I think battleground is going to be sort of affixed to Arizona, like battleground Arizona, because we always talk about that. What about where specifically she's going to be? Is this about just getting as many votes as she possibly can?
Yeah, so it's interesting because this county that she's going to be visiting is a Republican stronghold. And it'll be interesting to see if she's kind of replicating a strategy that some Democratic politicians have done in Pennsylvania, for example. Governor Shapiro, Senator Fetterman, those are both Democrats, and they went to Republican strongholds across that state, not in the effort of, I'm going to turn this county blue, but I'm going to take the lead from 75% Republican down to 60% Republican, and that'll help kind of the chances statewide.
And Douglas itself, where she's visiting, is a Democratic city.
Yeah, along with Bisbee, right up the road.
It's included, when they redrew the districts, it was included in Raul Grijalva's district because it is a Democratic place.
But it's
trying to boost turnout there might affect, a little bit more in southern Arizona.
But it's unlikely that she'll get the walk along the border ad with the local sheriff because sheriff, Mark Daniels, is a strong supporter of Trump.
That is a very important, though. Thank you for bringing
that up,
Tim,
it's a cliche and a tradition.
Standing in front of the wall.
Right, you got to have somebody in a uniform with a badge walking along slow-mo with the candidate right next to the
along
wall.
the fence on the border rail.
Yeah.
The steely gaze across the border.
But I'm glad you guys mentioned the party affiliation, you too, Ellie, because I think it's important that for both Republicans and Democrats, Republicans, immigration, border security, very top. But for Democrats, it's in there as well. And maybe some are convinced by a particular cable network that keeps talking about a crisis at the border. But Dylan, let's go back to, again, images. Yes, we joke about commercials, but how important, if Vice President Harris hadn't gone to the border in this campaign, what would that have looked like?
Certainly I think the GOP would have continued to blast her for never going to the border in their framing of things. Tim had mentioned, her assignment in the administration. It wasn't exactly as the border czar, as some people claim. It was about trying to figure out how to address the root causes of migration and working with especially Central American nations to try and stabilize some of the things there so that people aren't, driven to leave.
Well, that's a great point. And I wonder going forward now, I'm going to ask on this side of the table just to start, because we have sort of the columnist kind of guys over on this side as far as expressing opinion. Does this in any way affect, even if it ticks up a half a point, can this visit alone, Tim, make a big difference in terms of helping Kamala Harris win Arizona?
Theoretically, as you say, in a close race, any vote counts, and these visits are generally about getting media exposure in the given market. So Phoenix, which is the biggest market, of course, I'm sure all the TV stations will be down there for her visit, and that can have an effect. Yeah. Also, as the two of you have mentioned, changing the subject from security between the ports of entry to improvements at the port of entry, that's something that most people who don't live near the border never think of, right? Nobody thinks of that outside of the border region, but it actually is really important, and so that could maybe help her.
And it's going to be great fodder for national TV commercials to, put on the air in Wisconsin and Minnesota and Michigan of Harris at the border making statements about increasing border security and pointing out, yet again, the Democrats' line that it was Donald Trump, basically, who blocked the border security bill.
Well, and Zach, I wonder if it means a combination of symbolism and substance. Possible the vice president could pull that off over the next month or so.
Yeah, that's really kind of a key point, especially with her campaign having been a rather short tenured one, is getting out both that kind of message of hope and pushing a personality, but also starting to unveil at least a little bit of policy as time goes on.
Right. Ellie, let's move on to another topic which is very important to folks here in Tucson, and that is Bobby Robbins, U of A's outgoing president. You had some interesting details about the fact that he will still be paid quite well, even not as president. What are some details you can share?
Mm-hmm. So his initial contract that he signed before kind of the financial crisis at the university occurred was that he would remain as president until June of 2026. And earlier this spring, he announced that he would step down by June of 2026 when his contract ended, or sooner if the Arizona Board of Regents could find a suitable replacement. So the regents have, right, President Garamella of the University of Vermont. He is going to be the next president starting October 1, so quite soon. But President Robbins himself is going to be staying at the University of Arizona. He is going to be paid his base salary of over $700,000 a year. He's going to be receiving retirement benefits that are also kind of six figures. I think it's about $150,000 a year. He's going to receive a yearly car allowance of $10,000. That's cut back because it used to be a monthly allowance. Now it's yearly. And he's losing his residence because Garamella is taking over the presidential residency. And he's also going to be teaching at the university. So he's going to be a tenured faculty member in the College of Medicine at Tucson.
Well, that's where I want to jump in, because I think the salaries were quite interesting, because it seems like the salary is not, if it's a dip at all, it's quite tiny.
So he was initially making a little over $800,000 a year. And then kind of at the height of the financial crisis, when he was getting a lot of criticism from faculty and staff, he took a 10% salary cut. So now he's making about $750,000. And he is going to be paid that while he is a professor at the university. So it'll be interesting. I think he's going to be probably the most expensive professor that the University of Arizona has, and it's unclear if he's actually going to teach. President says, the former president before Robbins was Ann Weaver Hart. She left early, and she accepted a tenured position at the university with her same pay, and she didn't actually ever teach a class.
In fact, she had a year sabbatical, if I'm not,
Yes.
if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, Dylan, this is almost sounding like to me when a coach gets fired early, we're still paying this person for 3 years. Not to be too cynical, because I know the budget deficit is a lot more than $750,000, but so the university is going to be paying two presidents at once, basically.
Basically, yes. And we've seen this happen over and over and over again, right? Not just at the University of Arizona, but so often in government. There are some very sweet golden parachutes for high-ranking people. And, they end up not doing anything and still making a lot more money than any of us will ever get paid.
Well, I think a lot of people who are viewing or listening to the press room right now are very aware of what's going on. But Tim, if you wouldn't mind, can you give us just a real Cliff's Notes version of how large this budget deficit grew under President Robbins?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ellie, but it got to 177 million. Is that what it was? Yeah. So, I mean, that's really important because, November last year was when it truly became public that we had this massive budget deficit and a financial crisis. That really fell to the president. I mean, that is his job, along with the financial officers, to not overspend and to keep the finances on the straight and narrow. Theoretically, a misjudgment like that could lead to a firing, and in that case, you would not need, if you fired someone for cause, you would not need to pay them. Theoretically, they could have made that case against Robbins because he really messed this up. They didn't, and they generally don't. If they don't want to fight, they don't want a lawsuit.
They would end up in a lawsuit, and a whole lot of dirty laundry would be out that none of those folks want aired. Although we would like to know.
Yeah, not to mention what the lawyers would then cost for that lawsuit, and there's a chance you then pay them, and on top of it, still lose.
Yeah, there's a chance you lose. I always think, though, that there's a bit of I don't know, forgive me, but like class loyalty once you get to these levels. The regents and the presidents, they're not going to mess with people of their level in the bureaucracy and the social structure.
Well, Ellie, that struck me as well that the chair of the Board of Regents put out a real glowing statement, which seemed odd in the circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they're sticking by Robbins. And to be honest, like everyone's been saying, this is a pattern at the University of Arizona. In the last year, they accepted the resignation of Lisa Rolney, who was the then CFO that oversaw the university dipping into this financial crisis. And then later we reported that she was actually still on the payroll, making $500,000. And we also reported that President Robbins and CFO John Arnold said she was basically being paid to sit at home and wait for the phone to ring with any questions. I mean, Dave Hickey, the former athletic director, he's going to get paid until March of 2025. He has a salary of over $1 million. We have a new athletic director now, and the university and its donors bought out her old contract at Mizzou. So there have been lots of examples of the university doing this same strategy. So while it's not surprising, I think not only is it affecting the university financially, but there are hundreds of faculty and staff that have dealt with compensation freezes, no raises, for example, who have dealt with layoffs in their department, more workload, and this is impacting the morale.
And Tim, that goes to your class point, actually.
Yeah, there's a calculation here. And I think they should be making the calculation. So it is not quite 2 years until June 30th, 2026, which is the end of when Robbins gets paid. So if he gets paid in total somewhere close to $1 million, let's say it's $900,000. We're making the bet that it's going to cost us $1.8 million that it might cost us $1.8 million to fire him and get sued. I don't know. Maybe it's worth a gamble one of these times to actually fire someone and see what happens.
Yeah, and I mean, you've seen that even going back to like Rich Rodriguez, the old football coach, who it looked like they could have let him go for cause with some of the allegations of sexual harassment against him and the treatment of staff. But I believe he also was one of the people that they just paid out the contract, brought in Kevin Sumlin to take his place.
Dylan, this may be an absurd question considering what we've been talking about for the last 5 minutes, but before the budget deficit, was Bobby Robbins considered to be a good president?
I think that would really depend on who you asked, even before all these deficit numbers started being thrown around. Certainly if you were in one of the schools or departments that were not the favorite of his administration, you didn't quite like how things were going along already. But then, when all of this spun up and, we heard, it was $150 million, $170 something million, and then all of a sudden, no, it's only 70. Oh, no, it's only 53, and they're a deficit. And they were no actual structural changes taking place. They were just, these numbers were basically coming from thin air. And that really, I think, caused even more stress amongst folks, all of the worker bees in the university, whether you're, a professor or, somebody working at the student union, nobody had any idea what was actually happening, and it really seemed like the administration themselves had no idea.
Ellie, close us out on this one. What struck me as odd is that there was a local radio station in Tucson interviewed outgoing President Robbins, and he expressed interest in maybe being a college president or university president again. I'm not. That's why I even asked Dylan the question about was he considered to be a good president before the budget deficit, because we'd think the budget deficit would work against him, right? Looking for a new job?
Yes. So Dylan made a really good point, which is it depends on who you ask. And what I will say is that President Robbins deserves a lot of flowers for the way that he handled the COVID-19 pandemic, for the way that he honestly, he accepted responsibility for this financial crisis. He repeatedly said, "This is my fault." As soon as he announced he was leaving, he's been absent from faculty senate meetings. When the regents voted on his contract yesterday up at Flagstaff, he was not present, right? President Crow of ASU, the president of NAU, they were both at the meeting. Robbins was not. It's unclear to me whether or not he'd be able to land another presidency. I think Tim's point was really good, that there is a respect among that class. And I think I'm sure that he'll get good recommendations from the regents. I would not be surprised if that was the case.
He certainly managed to raise a whole lot of money for the university. And then, there are big donors, big boosters, not just in athletics, but of the university itself, who I think even now would say that they support Robbins.
Yeah. Donors loved him, and that counts for a lot at any university.
That's Tim Steller of the Arizona Daily Star. Also with us is Ellie Wolfe of the Arizona Daily Star, Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel, and Ziegler of AZPM. Let's move on and not spend a lot of time on this one. We're not going to speed through it. Senator Justine Wadsack has had her trial delayed. She was cited for speeding, going 71 in a 35 zone. Pre-trial hearing was delayed because of a judge's recusal. Dylan, let me start with you on this. Justine Wadsack has tried to make this a real political issue, even calling in Mayor Romero. There was some sort of persecution of her. Can you give us, again, a Cliff's Notes version of the background on this one?
So it was back in March 15th, I believe, when Wadsack was pulled over about 10 blocks from her home, allegedly speeding down Speedway, appropriately enough. And, she, because the legislature was in session, the concept called legislative immunity applied, where unless they commit, very, very serious crimes, lawmakers cannot be prosecuted while the legislature is working. The reason for that is because you don't want to have people who are going to go vote on something, carted off to the pokey so that they can't vote. You don't let other parts of the government interfere with the lawmaking process. That's also, it applies to Congress. It's part of the U.S. Constitution as well as the Arizona Constitution. But Wadsack has claimed over and over again that this is political persecution. She says that she was targeted. Her team Wadsack is trying to make the case that the police officer who pulled her over did so on purpose, knowing who she was. And if you read the incident report, the cop wrote down that she was a U.S. senator. This officer really didn't know who Justine Wadsack was, didn't really know what the whole legislative immunity bit was. He spent a long time, talking with one of his commanders and getting input from a legal advisor, during the traffic stop to figure out how to handle this and, determine, well, send her on her merry way for now, and we'll get back to this later. Yeah. When they did get back to it, Wadsack has, refused to go sign for the ticket and kickstart the process. So it took even a little bit longer to get this. It's actually a criminal speeding ticket to get this prosecution going.
Yeah, Zach, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, but it strikes me as odd that she would want to inflate this as opposed to just taking care of it quietly.
Well, she keeps, when she does do that, mentioning names such as, the Trump loyalists who are facing charges elsewhere because of the 2020 election. It's almost kind of lumping herself in with them a bit is what it seems. The one thing I will say, though, is I saw something interesting relating to her, too, which was Barrett Marson, a longtime GOP analyst, talking about her and her new role with Turning Point USA and going after Vince Leach, who she lost to in the primary, talking about how that could be the seat and those efforts could turn the Arizona Senate.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is a pattern with Justine Wadsack. The desperation for attention and publicity is something that's gone on for a long time. The fundamental fact that I think we ought to stick with is that she was measured going, first it was 50 miles an hour?
58 was what the officer said he clocked her at.
He said he clocked, what drew his attention to her was clocking her at 58, and then he said he followed her and later clocked her at 71. People in this town are sick and tired of people driving like that. And for a state senator not to just own up to it and, accept the ticket and say, sorry about that. I mean, that probably affected her, the outcome of the election that she lost.
This wouldn't even have been a story if she just would have paid those tickets. She also got a ticket for not having proof of insurance because she couldn't come up with that and still faces that charge. I've gotten tickets for not having my insurance card in. Okay. And you just take it down to the court later and they automatically dismiss the charge. And here months on, she hasn't done that.
And Ellie, didn't she lose an endorsement as well?
Yeah, so we reported that soon after this, she lost the endorsement of the police union. And I think that probably had a lot to do with her loss. It was a really narrow margin. But really, I have to respect her confidence in the way that she handled this, because I agree with the points made by everyone else. If she had just paid the ticket, I don't think she would have made the press in the same way, and I don't think that she would have lost that kind of really crucial endorsement, especially in that Republican primary. That police union endorsement is really key. And I think something else that was shared that's really interesting is she hasn't endorsed Vince Leach, who's going to be the Republican, who is the Republican nominee. And not just has she not endorsed Mr. Leach, she has attacked him on social media, and she has told her supporters not to vote for him. So it's interesting. She's so confident in herself and her influence over this district that she could be the reason why this state Senate in Arizona turns blue.
I don't want to insult you, but you have a future in political consulting. We have a couple minutes. I want to get to Arizona Supreme Court Justice Robert Brutinel announcing his retirement, Dylan. A couple of years before he actually has to leave the bench. He's not 70 years old yet. Not going to ask a legacy question because he's been on the court. Let's talk about what is possibly next. Governor Hobbs is going to get a chance to appoint her first Supreme Court justice. How significant is that? I mean, considering
it's a significant step. I mean, for it to be very meaningful, she would have to have the opportunity to appoint more. Right now, the vast majority of folks on the Arizona Supreme Court were appointed by Doug Ducey, who actually went ahead and basically packed the court. He expanded it so he could appoint more people.
Yeah, I mean, so Ducey appointed 5 of the 7. It was 2016 when the legislative Republicans proposed expanding the court from 5 to 7. Everybody, I talked to 5 of the past chief justices. Nobody supported that, but he got it. So he packed the court. And now there may be a little chickens coming home to roost factor, because with the abortion ruling that upheld the 1864 ban, there's a campaign to oust 2 of the people who Doug Ducey appointed, Catherine King and Clint Bolick. And so if they lose, there's also an initiative that comes into play here, but leave that aside. If they lose, and with Brutinel's retirement, that's possibly 3 appointments that Hobbs could make, and that could make a real difference.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, on that, there was actually the Arizona Agenda had a nice breakdown of some of the names that could be coming down the road to fill that vacancy once it gets there, or possibly even some other ones, some interesting names being thrown around from people who have some links to Hobbs already.
Yeah, and Dylan, very briefly on this, I thought a couple of the appointees that WC had were kind of interesting. Bill Montgomery, who'd been Maricopa County Attorney, very controversial, and Clint Bolick, as Tim mentioned, might not have much for future.
A political person before he got on the court.
Exactly. So we'll see if Hobbs goes that direction. We've got about a minute left, and this is now the time in the AZPM spotlight for Zach Ziegler, who's been doing great work on Tapped, the water podcast. Zach, pretty briefly, but tell us about what Kris Mayes had to say recently on the program.
Yeah, so we got a chance to speak with Attorney General Mayes after we discovered that Fondamonte, the Saudi-backed company, that there's been a lot of controversy over their presence in La Paz County, was expanding. We had a nice picture of a now hiring sign out in front, and we got their notice of intent to drill a new well, which was went through the Arizona Department of Water back in July. And that sparked a little bit of consternation from Mayes, who said maybe they needed to look a little closer. That was a spot where there used to be a World War II munitions range. She was suggesting maybe that could hold things up due to contamination. But the big thing was there was a little bit of issue between her and Katie Hobbs.
Okay.
A little bit of infighting there over how this whole thing will get panned out.
Okay, we'll keep listening to TAP. That is Zach Ziegler of AZPM, Ellie Wolfe of the Arizona Daily Star, Tim Steller of the Arizona Daily Star, Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. I'm Steve Goldstein.